So good evening and welcome to you all. Thank you so much for tuning into our important industry webinar this evening. Number 4 for the transition to management of Varroa. I'm your host. My name's Bianca Jiggins. I'm the Australian Honeybee Industry Council's National Coordinator for the VDOs under the program for the transition to management. ARBIC is the peak national representative body for the honeybee industry in Australia, as you all know. I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations people as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters in which we live and work, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Because we won't have an update from Tamara this evening from the T2M coordinator, we'd just like to share some details and information from the national program worth noting to the audience. So the first one is that the National Management Group met on the 25th of July and has approved a version 4.1 of the Transition to Management Plan, which means it's an extension of time to progress the activities where required until February 2026. And this is really good news for all of the remaining activities. We knew that Varroa Development Officer work was extended to a 2-year timeframe, and now all of the other activities will do the same. And those costs for all of that will remain capped at that upper agreed limit of $100 million. The second bit of information that's really cool information for the Varroa transition to management is the pollination coordinator position has been decided, and we are looking forward to onboarding that individual over the next few weeks. We'll update the industries throughout some communications coming out soon. So on to our program for this evening. Tonight's webinar aims to provide information on the bureaucratic processes to get from point A to point B. Commencement of a systematic approach to identify, assess and minimise risks by the states has been a continual process throughout this response. We will hear about the permits, record requirements and contingency plans in light of border restrictions and Varroa. Managing hive movements through risk-managed approach is essential to our industry's beekeepers. It's not just about pollination, it's about access to floral resources for healthy colonies and honey production, supporting pollination services and productive businesses. Tonight, we hope to explain the strategies developed as part of this crucial requirement to support the important work underpinning Australia's food security. Welcome to Nikki Jones, Agriculture Victoria, Adrian Harvey, Primary Industries and Region South Australia, Rob Stevens, Biosecurity Queensland, for their presentations to come, and the New South Wales Extension and Engagement Coordinator, Dave Fairhall. He's going to provide us with a report on Varroa mite in New South Wales currently, and the experiences and support being delivered by his team of the New South Wales Varroa Development Officers, or BDOs. A short bit of housekeeping for you all. Become a friend of ARBIC at honeybee.org.au. We will be providing this recorded webinar towards the end of the week, so please keep an eye out. If you're watching this recording in the future, please check websites for up-to-date information as it is current as of tonight, the 30th of July, so it may not be in the future. We will encourage you to answer your questions directly into the Q&A function on your screen below, and we'll collate as many questions as we can to answer live in the live webinar, the Q&A at the end. So I'd like to transfer across to our first presenter this evening, Nikki Jones from Agriculture Victoria. Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks, Bianca. Just get my screen ready to share. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name's Nikki Jones. I work for Agriculture Victoria in our honeybee biosecurity team. And obviously the last few years it's been dominated by Varroa and working alongside the national response and New South Wales DPI to try and slow the spread. It's pretty simple what we're up to in Victoria at the moment. As far as we know, Victoria remains Varroa free, and our main focus is on slowing the spread and on building industry resilience. And those things are both key elements of the National Transition to Management plan. New South Wales, as you know, has moved away from regulation of Varroa, but Varroa is still regulated in Victoria. It remains a declared exotic, and we have a control area order in place requiring all bees and bee products to have a permit. So that applies to hives, queens, beekeeping equipment, basically everything except for processed honey and processed wax. And it applies to bees and bee products moving from all states into Victoria. We're currently accepting hive movements from all states, including New South Wales. and we're currently accepting queen movements from all states except New South Wales. It's important to note that all permit applications are assessed on a case-by-case basis. So there is a permit officer at the other end doing their due diligence and checking that all of the permit eligibility criteria are being met. The permit conditions for hives, the risk mitigation measures that we have in place this year for hives are slightly amended from the previous 2 years. They now align more to the slow the spread principle. So they're slightly relaxed from when we were nationally pursuing eradication, but they're still aiming to keep varroa out for as long as possible. The last few weeks, we've been processing a large volume of hive movement permits in order to facilitate almond pollination here in Victoria. So a lot of beekeepers will be moving towards the end of this week into Victoria for almond pollination. And the permit conditions that they need to comply with in order to get a permit to come in. There must be a registered beekeeper in any state or territory. Must have completed biosecurity training, so we accept either the bulk course or the Tocal Varroa course. The important one is you must have no previous detections of varroa mites, so no alcohol washing history that has returned a positive result so far. Demonstrated compliance with your state legislative requirements, so we do some background checks before we let people in to make sure that they have been doing the right thing and doing regular testing. The hives must be tested prior to movement and be found free of varroa mite, and we're asking people to mark the lids, and I'll cover the testing rates in a minute. All the hives must be transported netted or closed in entrance. And while in Victoria, the loads must have their permit number or a copy of the permit displayed, and all hive movements must be recorded in our BMAX system while they're in Victoria. And the last one is they do have to provide a health certificate like usual. So basically what we're doing is anything that comes into Victoria from another state has a higher level of oversight and testing and traceability requirements on it so that we can keep track of that. The testing rates prior to entry for hives coming from New South Wales, the testing rate is at the 64 hives, and for hives coming from Queensland or South Australia or states without a varroa incursion, the testing rate is 21 hives. So they must be completed 2 weeks prior to entry in order for your permit to be approved. The biggest, so because we are processing a large volume of permit applications at the moment, I did want to just take the time to point out the biggest problem that beekeepers are having is after you get your permit approved, we ask you to create a BMAX account to log your movements and any testing that you do while you're here. And a lot of beekeepers have accidentally been registering themselves as a Victorian beekeeper, and it asks you to pay to register. If you're an interstate beekeeper and you're coming in for less than 3 months, you don't need to register here. You can just create this interstate beekeeper account that just allows you to the functionality of being able to log your movements and things like that without becoming a registered Victorian beekeeper. So there's been a few people get that one wrong, but I've fixed one of the links on our website, which should help people out. This is the link to our BMAX website down here, but you can also, if you just Google BMAX, it generally comes up. The way to apply for a permit is online. I don't have a fancy QR code, I apologise, but if you search Agriculture Victoria honeybee permits, it'll come up, the permits page. There's a whole bunch of different permits here. You just scroll down the green list and pick the one that applies to you. And you can contact our permits team at honeybee.permits@agriculture.vic.gov.au or through the customer service centre on 136 186. There is a high volume of permit applications at the moment, so we try to get people to allow 3 days. You can, if you know you're travelling into Victoria, put your application in early. So a lot of people have been doing that when they know they've got their contract for a pollination job down here, or they know they've got sites they want to come down to for a honey flow. They're getting their permit in, up to a month in advance. Obviously, they won't be able to submit their alcohol wash testing until 2 weeks prior, but you can set it all up and our permits officers can have it drafted and ready to go so that when you do submit your last test results and they're negative, then it's a much faster process. So that's been working really, well. So thanks to anyone that's coming in that has been really good with the paperwork. We appreciate it. I should also mention the best form of evidence so you'll be asked for evidence for the alcohol wash testing prior to coming in. The best form of evidence you can give us is receipts from your state's reporting system. We really like to see those. So at the moment, Victoria does remain varroa free, but we are striving to detect varroa early. So early detection remains an important part of slowing the spread. It allows us to give adequate forewarning and target our education and extension services to those beekeepers who may be exposed to the mite first. So we've got a range of surveillance in place. We have sentinel hives along the Vic New South Wales border around the Sunraysia area, where we know that there has been New South Wales hives pollinating in close proximity on the other side. So we've got 7 sites with 1 to 2 hives at each site. They're checked every 6 weeks in alignment with the National Bee Pest Surveillance Program. So using alcohol wash, drone uncapping, sticky mats and miticides. We've got swarm catch boxes as well, and we've caught several swarms since last September. And there's been no mite findings to date. In addition to that, last year, we did send some officers up to do some helium drone balloon, essentially training, but it was also meaningful surveillance around Balranald, so in an area not known to be infested with varroa mites. And those are both examples of surveillance that's been done on feral or wild bee populations. And there's no evidence so far that there's been transmission of varroa into the feral bees along the river that we can detect yet. But this is the good stuff. The real surveillance that's happening is happening with you guys, the beekeepers. So for the 2023-24 season, we've had 4,849 tests entered on BMAX. So close to 8,000 drone uncappings, over 19,000 alcohol washes, and over 7,000 sugar shakes. That's from apiaries representing over 180,000 hives. We don't have that many hives in Victoria, so a lot of that is repeat surveillance from dedicated beekeepers. So we're still really strongly encouraging everyone to report their results to us in BMAX. The surveillance that I've got there represents a really good mix of commercial and recreational, and a good geographic spread. So I do want to say a huge thank you to everyone, both our permit holders and ordinary beekeepers that are simply complying with the Biosecurity Code of Practice requirements for getting all this surveillance data in. It represents a really significant amount of data, demonstrating that Victoria is still varroa free, and it's a really good effort. So I want to say a big thank you to all Victorian beekeepers for doing that. Let's keep up the good work so we can try and detect it early. Almond pollination is just around the corner. AgVic apiary inspectors will be in the field, as always, conducting risk-based surveillance and compliance operation. So almond pollination for us represents the largest volume of movement of hives. So it's one of the riskiest times of year biosecurity-wise. But hopefully with the permit system that we have in place and the cooperation of beekeepers and orchardists, it'll be a success this year. And hang on. Preparedness for varroa detection. So what people often want to know is, what are you going to do when it comes to Victoria? So obviously at the moment, it's not a matter of if, but when it'll come to Victoria, varroa mite. We are aware of that. And Victoria's sort of high level aims are to align very much our actions to the National Response Plan and deliver an appropriate on-ground response aimed at minimising the biosecurity risk and slowing the spread of varroa, and also to support industry and affected stakeholders through timely communications, education and engagement activities. So the important one is there will be no destruction of hives in Victoria upon detection of varroa here. All the actions that we work through will be based around the overall aims of slowing the spread, basically. So key objective number 1, reducing the biosecurity risk in the most practical way for the scenario, It's important to note that it'll be a case-by-case scenario. So depending on where we find varroa and what the circumstances are, there's a range of actions that we might take, but these might include quarantining or isolating the infested hives, possibly returning the infested hives to their state of origin, and or requiring treatment of the infested hives. There's some of the actions that might be taken with the initial infested beekeeper. And yeah, it'll really depend who that person is, where that person is, what the circumstances are. Our second priority would be to conduct tracing to identify any other potentially infested hives in Victoria, and to notify everyone, basically. Oh, so on tracing, sorry, I should say that we do have high expectations in Victoria, and especially for anyone entering Victoria, that you're keeping really good records in accordance with the Biosecurity Code of Practice that you can provide to us rapidly upon request. That's why we ask all interstate beekeepers to log their movements on BMAX. But basically, we'll be working with the infested beekeepers, and that only other beekeepers that are considered at risk through geographical proximity. They'll be provided support through our VDO network. So I do want to stress that experience from our New South Wales colleague tells us that low-level exposure means that, varroa won't become detectable in your apiary for around 5 or 6 months. So there's no need for immediate panic. The department will be working to minimise the biosecurity risk to your hives as much as possible, and you'll be given follow-up support if you are a close contact, to use the COVID language, I suppose. Yeah, as always, apiary inspectors will remain alert and respond to suspected breaches of the regulatory requirements, and conduct an investigation where possible. But our primary plan after the initial detection is to really support beekeepers and work with them in an education and engagement capacity. Which takes me to the fact that we now have our varroa workshops up and running in Victoria. The first 5 have been put up on Humantix. So yeah, strongly encourage all Victorian beekeepers to sign up as soon as you can. It's one of the best things you can do to prepare for the arrival in Victoria. I think for New South Wales beekeepers listening, you guys are probably really used to all this, but for Victorians, it's still a little bit of an unknown space that it's coming, So yeah, encouraging Victorian beekeepers to sign up to these workshops and start to get our head around what it's going to be like to live with it. So Victoria has 8 contract trainers that have been engaged by Tocal, and in collaboration with Victorian-based industry co-hosts, so local beekeeping clubs, we plan to host 25 varroa training workshops across the state. So the training program begins in August, which is only, 2 days away? And it's aimed at both commercial and recreational beekeepers, and it's funded under the National Response. At the workshops, you'll gain not only a thorough foundational understanding of varroa mite and IPM strategies, or integrated pest management strategies, but you'll also be able to network with other beekeepers in your area, engage with your local bee club, and meet your varroa development officers as well. So I do want to do a big shout out to all the bee clubs in Victoria, and we're really encouraging you to network with them at these events. So the Geelong one's being co-hosted by the Geelong Bee Club, Wangaratta co-hosted by the North East Apiarist Association, Maryborough co-hosted by the CVAA, and the Mildura one co-hosted by the VAA Sunraysia branch, and Colac is being supported by the VAA generally, the Victorian Apiarist Association. Future workshops that are planned, these may be subject to change based on the availability of suitable facilities and demand as the situation progresses, but at the moment they've been slated for Blackburn in Melbourne, Hamilton, Horsham, Traralgon, Melbourne. There's a few in Melbourne: Bendigo, Bairnsdale, Shepparton, Diggers Rest, Seaford, Ballarat, Woodend, Moonee Ponds, Swan Hill, Geelong, Warragul, Yarra Valley, Mornington, another one in Bendigo, and Melbourne. And we look forward to working with co-host clubs in the rollout of the training across Victoria. And we're really glad to hear, Bianca, of the extension on the time for delivering all of these. So yeah, I think it's important to note here that networking with your clubs is going to be really important. and valuable as we move towards living with Varroa. So I'm actively encouraging everyone to get out there and support that as they come around, as the training workshops move around Victoria. Varroa development officers. So our VDO program in Victoria has also commenced. It was a mountain of work to get through recruitment and everything. But we have 2 full-time and 10 casual Varroa development officers in Victoria. That's the model we've gone with to we hope give us the best results for the funding that we've been allocated. So on the screen here, I've grabbed a photo of everyone to get you familiar with their faces. Jen Ryan is the program coordinator, the education and engagement coordinator. So she'll work closely with Bianca in the delivery of the Victorian program. And we've got Ashton and Chris as our full-time Varroa development officers. And then we have this motley crew. We've got Ali, Tony, Buffy, Don, Scott, Krista, Peter, Junie, Joe, and Lachlan. So these guys have extensive backgrounds in beekeeping and beekeeper training, including working with Varroa in New Zealand. They represent years of experience as hobbyists and commercial beekeepers from all across Victoria, come from varied backgrounds and different locations. And so we hope to have a video that will be familiar with your local conditions and just right for what your club or your particular operation needs help with. In conjunction with the workshop events, the videos will be available to provide extension and training on Varroa management. So yeah, we really encourage you to get in touch with them and make use of them while we've got them. To contact our Varroa development officers, you can email victorian.video@agriculture.vic.gov.au and or phone 1800 958 485. So what you can expect, initially you'll get a response from either one of the full-time VDOs or the coordinator during business hours, and then depending on your request, the VDO will answer your question directly or they'll refer you to one of the casuals for more information. But basically it's a centralised system, and then, yeah, you'll be put in touch with who you need to talk to. And that's pretty much us in Victoria. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Nikki. Very informative, very encouraging, and very energetic. It is a great crew that you've got set up to welcome the beekeepers and help them in Victoria. So kudos to the Victorian department for acting pretty quickly to get that happening. I'd like to cross over to Adrian Harvey, please, and we'll take some information about what's happening in South Australia.
Good. Thanks, Nikki. Tough act to follow. Yeah, good evening. My name is Adrian Harvey. I'm the program manager for Rural within South Australia. South Australian aspects are very similar to Victoria. South Australia is looking to provide beekeepers with the longest possible time frame before Varroa is detected, so they can prepare. And similarly to Victoria, we are looking to slow the spread of Varroa once it gets into South Australia. The QR code you'll see on the following slides, thanks Joe, will lead to our Varroa pages. So within South Australia, the Livestock Act is the primary legislation that's used to manage bees within South Australia. The major instrument underneath that is a gazettal notice, which sets out all the conditions for entry for the different categories. We also have provided a set of guidelines to help fill out those application forms. Although South Australia is actually quite isolated in terms of bee movements, we don't get a lot of bee movements into the state other than for congregation events like almonds and lucerne and canola. We get about 5,000 to 10,000 hives coming across from other states every year. But South Australia is in the position where we're actually highly reliant on other states for queens, particularly from the eastern states. We're looking at around 50 to 60,000 queens per year. So we've got quite a bit of movement of those coming across. Presently, any application for high-risk apiary movement apiary commodity movement, I should say. So bees, bee colonies and queens from New South Wales is currently still suspended. That is likely to be lifted later as varroa spreads into other jurisdictions and into South Australia. Entry into South Australia is presently via an application permit. This is from all states and territories. And the applications are under 6 categories, as you can see on the screen. Fairly distinct: bees, queens, components, appliances, products, but also beekeeping plants. So we also focus on the trucks and utes and loaders and trailers, etc., and ensuring that meet biosecurity standards for movement as well. Each of these categories have their corresponding pre and post requirements, which are outlined in the Government Gazette. But the guidelines actually have much more simple to read and without the government speak for those. Thanks, Joe. In terms of entry conditions, too far, one back. Thank you. So in terms of the testing and sampling, we have for bee colonies coming across into South Australia, we're asking still at a higher level than Victoria's provided for a non-varroa jurisdiction. We still see the need to maintain that. So for those testing, bringing in up to 64 hives, they're required to test all. 65 to 640, we've got a test minimum of 65s, but you need to actually have a representative sample from across the apiaries which are actually constituting that load. And then 641 and more, we test 10%. We're seeking for you to test 10% of your apiaries which constitute the load as well. So getting a representative sample from all those apiaries which are constituting those loads. Other requirements that are sought for South Australia include that training requirement, so the TOCAL bulk course or the Cert 3 course. There's also testing requirements, which I've just outlined. We also have treatment requirements for particular commodities, so whether it's heating, freezing, radiation or isolation. There's also the decontamination of vehicles inside and out, and obviously the health certificate from the originating jurisdiction as well. All these applications are, like Victoria, individually assessed by ourselves and based on risk as well. Next slide, thanks. Within South Australia, we're currently delivering the workshops that are scheduled for South Australia. We've got 8 scheduled to be held across South Australia over the 2024 and 2025. We've already conducted 2 workshops in Clare and Renmark already, and looking to get additional workshops onto the Humanitix site for other regions, particularly Murray Bridge, Mount Gambier, Port Lincoln, and additional workshops within Adelaide. The approval of the extension to the national plan will definitely help us to push out those workshops to more appropriate times when beekeepers do have capacity to actually have more capacity to actually attend those workshops. Although we've only got 8 workshops scheduled for South Australia, we're expecting our videos to be supplementing these workshops with smaller regional workshops, small sessions, small group sessions with associations, and also face-to-face as well as one-to-one. Next slide, thank you. That's right, I've hidden one slide, that's okay. In terms of support, South Australia is currently recruiting for 2 videos within South Australia, and also an extension and engagement coordinator. We're currently going through that process. It is taking us a little bit of time. We've only got a small team within South Australia, but we hope to have them on board as soon as possible. The other thing that PIRSA is also providing is something very similar to the Rural Resilience Officers. It's called the Farm and Business Mentor Service, and these mentors can actually provide a lot of access to financial services, local health networks, emotional wellbeing and counselling services. Likewise, assistance with government and non-government bodies and filling out grant applications and so forth. And also can put you in contact with community organisations as well. I've mistakenly hidden one slide, unfortunately, but that's all right. In terms of accessing all the information, the Varroa pages, the QR code should actually lead you to that within South Australia. We're asking all permits, inquiries to go through the PIRSA Bee Biosecurity email address you can see on the screen, or any notifications, etc., regarding Varroa detections, obviously through the exotic plant pest hotline as well. I think we've probably made up some time from for you, but that's the end of my slides for today.
Fabulous. Thanks, Adrian. Yes, we have made up time. That's been really neat. I will just switch across if we get ready to have our next presenter is Rob Stevens from Biosecurity Queensland, a seasoned webinar provider. So Rob, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Bianca. And thanks very much to the team for the invite to come and share the work that we're doing up here in Queensland. Hopefully my presentation's sharing for you now. So my name's Rob Stevens. I'm the current manager of the Varroa Innovation and Resilience Initiative here in Queensland, formerly known as the Varroa Mite Prevention and Preparedness Program. We've just recently had a bit of a rebranding. So if you are keen to stay up to date with what's happening in Queensland, I'd really encourage you to jump on our DAF website and sign up to our e-alerts, and you'll get regular updates of the work we're doing up here. So tonight I'll try and cover a fair bit of ground. We'll go over the movement control situation in Queensland, as well as our 3-stage approach to transition and management. We'll also touch on Queensland's component of the National Management Program as well. So the whole state of Queensland is what we call a Varroa Mite Biosecurity Zone. So that means you must hold a biosecurity instrument permit issued by the Queensland Department of Ag and Fisheries to move bees, beehives and beekeeping equipment into Queensland from a state or territory where Varroa has been found. So Queensland was actually one of the first states to move away from emergency provisions. In early 2023, we moved to the permanent zone system. So since then, that has meant that you can actually move bees and beehives, bee products into Queensland from states that don't have Varroa, and you don't even need a biosecurity instrument permit. So like the other states, if you are in Queensland and you are moving bees, you do have a record requirement. You're required to keep accurate records for all movements of hives. We don't prescribe how that record must be kept. You don't have to send us a declaration. You just do have to keep it. It can be via your own app, manual hard copy, a record book, as long as you've kept your records for the previous 2 years, so we can conduct those tracing investigations as required. So as we've mentioned tonight, each state and territory has their own requirements. So if you are moving equipment into Queensland, it's really important that you follow the advice from the states that you're moving from and moving through. So a big body of work that our program's been doing over the last 2 years is establishing and implementing a permit system for interstate movement. As you'd appreciate, the border situation has been very fluid. Every state has different legislation and different reasons for doing what they do. We like to think we've had a couple of big wins along the way. We did facilitate almond pollination in 2022 under the emergency provisions. 18 months ago, we did move away from that into the permanent biosecurity zone. We were able to facilitate almonds again last year. And despite the detections in almonds, we were able to repatriate over 10,000 hives back into Queensland. So look, it is an ongoing situation. We are very hopeful that we will have movement of more beekeeping equipment in the weeks and months to come. So just a quick visual representation of what that looks like. Over the last 12 months, we've issued 141 biosecurity instrument permits. Look, our team is very responsive. If you are in New South Wales and you are applying for a permit, we'll usually process that permit application in less than a day, but give us 1 to 2 days. You'll see most of those movements have come from New South Wales, along with those movements from Victoria and almonds last year. So we're pretty confident that we've been able to facilitate the movement of thousands of items of equipment from these states without introducing Varroa into Queensland. So in terms of almond pollination this year, we've only actually issued 12 health certificates for about 8,500 hives. That's 5 certificates for South Australia, totaling 3,000 hives, and to date 7 certificates for Victoria with just under 5,500 hives. So the number's a little bit low, but it is fairly consistent with what's been issued the last 2 seasons. So as we're continuously working to progressively allow the movement of other commodities through the biosecurity instrument permit system. You can currently move everything except live bees into Queensland from New South Wales. So that includes equipment for irradiation, full supers, empty supers and apiary equipment. And we're also working with the Australian Queen Bee Breeders Association on mitigation measures for the recommencement of movement of queens in the upcoming season, which will be very important now that Varroa is here to get those genetics moving again. So since that transition and management decision was made back in September last year, Queensland's been working on its own transition and management framework with the aim of minimising the impact of Varroa mite on Queensland honeybee and pollination reliant industries by transitioning to a state where Varroa is manageable and its impact on industry productivity is greatly reduced. So similar to the other states, our objectives very much aligned to that of the National Management Program. We've got 4 main objectives in reducing the risk of Varroa transmission and mitigating impacts of industry, enhance bee biosecurity and business resilience, strengthening the relationships, building community and industry capacity for integrated pest management principles, and supporting pollination security and data-driven decision-making will be really important moving forward. So here in Queensland, we're planning a 3-stage approach. Like the other states, it's inevitable that Varroa is going to make its way into Queensland. We're not anticipating eradication efforts to take place. We're not expecting widespread movement control. Likewise, if there are detections in other jurisdictions, that's not going to affect our game plan moving forward. As I mentioned, the whole state of Queensland is a biosecurity zone, and if there is a detection in another state, we don't need to change any emergency provisions under the Act. We're already covered if Victoria or South Australia were to go hot with Varroa. So we're currently in stage 1, where Varroa mite is undetected. We maintain that biosecurity zone, and we're preparing for what stage 2 looks like. So basically stage 2 is just that initial wave of detections in Queensland and shoring up that chemistry availability. Moving into stage 3, that's more about long-term integrated pest management, supporting industry through this process, and then progressing the updates required to our Queensland legislation. So a bit more detail on stage 1. We're going to continue surveillance on sticky mat surveillance targeting high-risk Varroa mite carriers. That's in particular movements from New South Wales and interstate. We're establishing Sentinel Hive network. We're going to keep encouraging our public reporting of hive testing and really increasing our capability through mapping, cool mapping and heat mapping. We're also trying to ensure we've got that chemistry available when we do get Varroa here, that beekeepers are going to have access to as many tools in the toolkit as possible and have as many chemicals available as possible here in Queensland. We're also going to continue to focus on education and extension opportunities, both through the National Management Program and also through some of our own initiatives, which I'll go into. Obviously, we can't keep Varroa out for too much longer. It is on our doorstep. The closest detection we have in Queensland at the moment is Lennox Head. That's about 64 kilometres from the Queensland border, from the Tweed. And as you can see from that map, we've got a very dense population of registered beekeepers directly across the border. We also consider the area around Stanthorpe and Warwick to the west as another high-risk pathway due to commercial movement. So to combat this, we're enhancing our surveillance in high-risk areas. Similar to Victoria, we've established a Sentinel hive network. Hopefully that's going to provide that early warning system that Varroa has entered the state. We've established 18 Sentinel hives at 17 key locations all across the Queensland-New South Wales border. These are tested every 6 weeks using sticky mat and miticide. So we're also preparing in other ways. Biosecurity Queensland has started securing a stockpile of miticide treatments and placing them strategically around the state. At the moment, we've got about 23,500 treatments spread around, and we've got an approved budget for much, much more. We've also recently finished an EOI process where we're working with bee suppliers and agri-sellers, and that's to shore up that chemical supply chain once Varroa does make its way here and we swap to the combat jurisdiction permit. So like all states, we're really encouraging beekeepers to get in there and check their hives and report their results, both positive and negative, to their respective jurisdictions. So in Queensland, that's done via our online reporting tool, which is called B123. And this really provides that data that gives us a good understanding of where the number of hives are in Queensland and their health status. So that information is not used for any other purpose, and it's covered under our Privacy Act. So since our program began, we've had 2,125 submissions to our B123 system. So that means just under 31,000 hives have been checked by Queensland beekeepers, which have all tested negative to Varroa mite. So last financial year, we had 1,213 submissions and just under 18,000 hives, which all returned a negative result. So we're using that industry-led passive surveillance and combining it with our government-led surveillance data. And that's being used to create hot and cold mapping layers for Varroa detections and negative surveillance density. So these layers are available online, and that's to help beekeepers make informed decisions on hive movements using real-time data. So this data is going to be added to the National Varroa Mite Management Program's dynamic mapping, which you guys should all be aware of. And this will be good to see that eventually all the state's data will feed into a national hot and cold map. So Queensland was actually one of the first states to start sharing the negative surveillance data, and our positive surveillance layers are ready to go once the time comes. So I'll briefly touch on the future stages of the response and what we've got planned. So similar to Victoria and South Australia, we're not anticipating intervention and eradication once these detections happen. We will have basic level surveillance to determine the likely pathway that Varroa entered on, try and establish, do a bit of delimiting surveillance to see how far it's got to, see some of the mite loading. And firstly, we've got to confirm that it is actually related to the New South Wales detection and it's not a new incursion. So we think transmission is going to occur in two likely pathways. That's through natural spread or through human-assisted movement of Varroa mite carriers. So I won't spend too much time on this, but our team's been doing a lot of work in the background on scenario planning. So we feel there's 4 main scenarios of likely entrance into Queensland. There's natural spread from New South Wales. There's human-assisted spread via legal hive movement. And there's human-assisted spread via illegal hive movement. There's always the possibility, though, of a new incursion, and we would be very mindful of that there is the possibility that unwanted viruses could still be introduced into Australia. So it's going to be very important in the first instance to prove that this is linked to New South Wales and not a new incursion. So finally, stage 3 takes us to long-term management of Varroa. So that's industry-led integrated pest management, having chemistry availability, us supporting industry with their IPM, and then progressing those changes to our government legislation. So that takes us to Queensland's role in the national program. So Queensland's national transition management framework very much aligns with that of the national program. And we're very, very close to rolling out our component of the national response plan. So similar to the other states, we've got an allocation of Varroa training workshops. We've been allocated 19 here in Queensland. Our offers have just gone out for Queensland's 8 contract trainer positions, who we're hoping to onboard in the coming weeks. The Queensland Train the Trainer event will take place on the 28th and 29th of August in Dutton Park in Brisbane. And we've already started working with some of the beekeeping groups and the Queensland Beekeeping Association on setting some of these dates for those 19 workshops. But we also very much welcome the decision from the National Management Group in allowing us a little bit more time to get those workshops out into next year. So Queensland's also been allocated 6 Varroa development officers. So our plan is to appoint 4 full-time officers and 2 part-time officers. Applications for these positions closed on the 5th of July, and our shortlisting is pretty much complete, and we're hoping those offers are going to go out in the very near future. So our VDOs are mainly going to be based down in the southeast, where most of our Queensland beekeeping industry resides. We'll also have an extension engagement coordinator, which also will be likely based in the southeast region. So that position is currently advertised if anyone is interested. So we're planning for the VDOs to start attending recreational club and commercial association branch meetings from September. So we're roughly about a month behind where Victoria and South Australia are at present. So this map on the right, that's a rough projection of where we think those 19 workshops are likely to take place. Now, that's based on the information we get from our beekeeping industry via the biosecurity entity registration system. So just a quick snapshot of the Queensland beekeeping industry for you. As of last week, we have 10,225 registered beekeepers in Queensland, and they own just over 164,000 hives. So interestingly, about 74% of beekeepers in Queensland only own 4 hives or less. 65% of beekeepers are in the southeast corner of Queensland, and 85% of beekeepers are located south of Bundy on the Fraser Coast. So another initiative our program has been rolling out is the Biosecurity Champions Network. So this has been established with recreational beekeeping clubs throughout the state. We've got 21 biosecurity champions across 15 recreational beekeeping clubs. So these are going to be a contact point for beekeepers to share their concerns, questions, and request support. And we really envision that these guys will be working closely with the VDOs once they come on board in the coming weeks. So, like I mentioned before, we have had a bit of a name change here in Queensland. We were formerly the Varroa Mite Prevention and Preparedness Program. We now, moving forward, go by the Varroa Mite Innovation and Resilience Initiative. So, in addition to the Transition and Management Plan, Queensland is providing an additional $5.5 million of funding over 3 years to embed community-led action to manage Varroa mites. So that is resources going to be used to increase community engagement and community innovation through industry and community-led projects, early pest detection and slowing the spread when Varroa does arrive, fostering a resilient and well-informed beekeeping community, and mitigating the impact of Varroa mite on commercial business continuity. So not that it's a competition, but we think this puts Queensland in a very good position moving forward, that we've got ongoing funding past the life of the National Transition and Management Program. So a few of the key deliverables of that program will be establishing a bee biosecurity roundtable. That'll involve reps from all elements of industry, researchers, government and pollination-reliant industries. We'll also be establishing a community bee innovation fund or grant funding. So that's designed to support and encourage industry-led innovation. And that's for new ways of monitoring, surveillance and treatment techniques. So it recognises the power of industry to develop and manage their own solutions to Varroa-led problems. And obviously, we're going to keep on focusing long-term on extension and training. So a very quick shout out to some of the other bee biosecurity programs that Biosecurity Queensland supports. We've got the National Bee Pest Surveillance Program at high-risk ports throughout the state. We've got the National Bee Biosecurity Officer Program. We've had the Purple Hive Project, which is just concluded at the Port of Townsville. We've got the Bee Right Program, which is a Commonwealth innovation pilot being run with Vimana Tech. We've been a long-term supporter of the Environmental DNA Project with JCU and ANU, and we're just getting in the ground floor on an ANU surveillance project that's focusing on feral colonies and population genetics. So things aren't going to slow down anytime soon. It's a very big year ahead. We've got Almonds 2024 kicking off as of about today. We've got the Bee Biosecurity Roundtable, the Innovation Grants program. We're currently recruiting for all our national based positions. We're also recruiting internally for our own Queensland program, 5 positions. We're supporting those new research projects, continuing the Sentinel Hive border surveillance, and also looking at potential changes to required legislation. So we're very much looking forward to working with industry as we progress through this process. But I really encourage anyone who wants to follow what's going on in Queensland to sign up to our e-alert system, and you'll get those regular updates. But if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat, and thanks very much for listening.
Fabulous. Another great one. Thank you so much, Rob. So that concludes the wrap around the states which we know is helping support pollination and honey production and supporting those border restrictions. So we just wanted to let the audience know that the best way to have a comment or a question is to enter it into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And I'd like to welcome Dave Fairhall, the coordinator of the Extension and Engagement Program in New South Wales, the Varroa Development Officers, or VDOs as they're commonly known. Dave, take it away. You're going to give us a great snapshot of the current situation in New South Wales.
Thank you, Bianca. I'll just share my screen.
Looks like Dave might be having some internet issues in his location tonight. Sorry, Dave, I don't know if you can hear me. I wonder if there is, we might just pause a little tiny bit and see if we can get Dave back online. Or otherwise, we do have some members of the New South Wales Varroa Development Officer team in the background. Or Tamara.
Thanks, Bianca. Well,
Am I back online now?
Oh, you're back. All right, sit tight, everyone. Maybe we'll get Joe to share. Do you think Joe can share your
Probably Joe, you share, because my internet's become very dodgy here. Yep.
No worries. Oh, nothing like a good technical issue to spice it up a little bit.
Well, it's been going so well up until now. All right, can everyone see that, and can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, excellent. All right, next slide, please, Joe. Okay, can you guys still hear me, or is my internet really bad?
No, we can hear you. We're on the introductory slide.
All right, excellent. Okay, so tonight I just want to give a quick overview of the New South Wales situation. We'll talk briefly about slowing the spread in New South Wales, and then we're going to go through some case studies from what the New South Wales Varroa Development Officers are seeing in the field, just really to highlight the Varroa risks during the build-up phase that we're going through in New South Wales. Next slide, please, Joe.
We're on the overview slide, Dave.
Yeah, the slides aren't even coming up for me. Okay, all right. If you're on the overview slide, yeah, it's only just come up for me. What terrible internet. So I'll go on the next slide. We'll actually talk about the Varroa spread in New South Wales. in the coming months. There's no longer movement restrictions in New South Wales, and the other jurisdictions have just spoke about the restrictions in other jurisdictions. So with regards to border issues,
So for those that, and many apologies, and Dave's by far the better technical expert over this than me, and he's put this slide pack together for us. So I think what Dave was trying to say is that there's no longer movement restrictions within New South Wales. So within New South Wales, people are free to move. However, there are border restrictions in other jurisdictions. So Dave, did you want to try and turn your video off and see if that improves the audio quality? What we're seeing so far, I'll hand back over to Dave.
yeah, so the commercial sector, we're actually not hearing, the VDOs are not hearing about big losses within the commercial sector. And either we're not hearing about them and some of that is happening, or it's very much likely the case from speaking with the commercial guys in New South Wales that they've really got on the front foot and they've got themselves prepared for management of Varroa, and they seem to be doing quite a good job of that. The recreational sector is where we're seeing the increased hive losses, and that's in areas where in areas where we've got high Varroa reports. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the case studies, but there's been some, pretty substantial losses in the recreational sector. Next slide, please. This is just a very quick overview of the heat map as of today. It's been filtered for all-time positive reports. And you can see that, there's some of those reports that are way out west from almonds last year, but the main areas that we've finding spread in New South Wales is continued spread from that Sydney Central Coast, Hunter Valley area. We've now got some spread south of Sydney down into the Nowra area, and we've had a detection right down at Bega. There's been some progression further up the Hunter Valley, up into the Scone sort of area. It's extending north of the Hunter Valley, and the Kempsey cluster, which is that the darker cluster further up the coast. It is extending south from there down through Port Macquarie and pushing up north towards Coffs Harbour. And then the detections up around the Coffs Harbour area are starting to spread north and south as well. So yeah, that's really an update on where we sit at the moment. Next slide, please. We've had undertaken quite a few workshops in New South Wales. I don't know the exact number, but there's been lots, and we've still got 8 more workshops scheduled at Waitara, Penrith, Wyong, Muswellbrook, Merewether, Armidale, Albury and Orange. If anyone hasn't been to a workshop and would like to go to one, I'd really encourage you to look at those locations and see whether you could get there. By and large, we have very, very positive feedback from the workshops, and I attended a couple on just this last weekend, and they were really, really good events, and the people that attended were very appreciative and got a lot out of it. Next slide, please. So within New South Wales, the slow the spread, it's not about slowing the spread geographically. Statewide spread's inevitable in New South Wales. Beekeepers have to move their bees to make a living. Pollination-dependent industries need pollination services. But we can all do our part locally. So the best thing to do is to keep up to date with the latest information and seek any Varroa education opportunities that become available. Know how to identify Varroa. VDOs in New South Wales still receive quite a few reports of Varroa that turn out not to be Varroa. Next point there is to develop a Varroa management plan that suits your circumstances, and VDOs can help in that space, in particular with talking about treatments and what the best treatments are in different situations, and also to think forward about what treatments you might need to use later in the season. So to keep on top of that and try and develop a plan. Regular monitoring is essential, and as is treatment at the recommended thresholds. Keep an eye on the Varroa heat map, and there's a point I'd like to make about the heat map, and I think it's been made clear before that the data on the heat map is only as good as the information that gets reported. It displays both positives and negatives, and it is a really useful tool for you to assess the risk of moving into an area. I'd like to just point out that obviously it's still required for positives to be reported under biosecurity legislation in New South Wales. Negatives don't have to be reported under legislation, but we really encourage people to support the information in the heat map by reporting those negative detections. And the other thing you can do is to coordinate treatments with other beekeepers in your local area. So slowing the spread in New South Wales is really about managing Varroa in your hives so that you reduce the spread between your hives, between your apiaries within your business or your hobby, and to try and minimise the effect you have on other beekeepers around you, just to give them more time before they're at treatment thresholds to get themselves ready. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through some case studies now. This is where I'm going to spend most of the time. There's been some really interesting things that VDOs have been finding in the field in New South Wales, and I think that's really important to get that out to as many people as we can. Just a reminder that the case studies we're going to go through, there's 4 of them, and they are some of the worst case scenarios, and they're really there to highlight the challenges that you may face. And bear in mind that VDOs are largely contacted people that are beekeepers that are really in tough situations. So this is not going to happen to everyone, but it's really just about getting the information out there. Your experience may be different, but by sharing the case studies, it's about helping you prepare or realise that you need to prepare for when you get Varroa and to manage it going forward. Next slide, please. So case study number 1, this was a Sydney-based beekeeper, and that beekeeper regularly monitored for Varroa and is treating at recommended thresholds. He had 7 hives, and the initial detection, 6 were below threshold, but 1 hive had 13 mites per 300 bees. All 7 hives were treated with Baverol for an 8-week period. It's maximum treatment period for Baverol. Post-treatment, he did monitoring straight away, and the results were below threshold. But 4 weeks later, he was back to 20 to 30 mites per 300 bees. And at that point, he initiated treatment with Formic Pro. At the end of the Formic Pro treatment, he didn't monitor straight away, but 4 weeks later, he monitored again and had 10 to 15 mites per 300 bees, which is still above treatment threshold. So those hives are currently being treated with ApiGuard. And the point that we're trying to make out of discussing this case study is that in areas where there's a high density of bees and there's been a history of Varroa in the area, you're likely to get reinfestation, which is going to mean that you're going to have to do regular treatment to keep your bees healthy. Next slide, please, Joe. Second case is also a Sydney-based beekeeper with 2 hives. That beekeeper was doing alcohol washes every 16 weeks routinely. And on discussions with the beekeeper, they were doing a very good job with regards to their monitoring technique. They did monitoring in late April and detected no mites. And then the beekeeper found both hives dead in early July. And it's likely due to Varroa. There could possibly have been other factors at play there, but we've put that comment in there because we didn't actually get to see those hives. It was based on discussion with the beekeeper and photos that were sent through, but very likely Varroa, heavy infestation with Varroa. That's the quickest case we've seen in the videos have seen in New South Wales, where we've had a negative monitoring result to complete colony decline, and that was around 66 days. So in that area, there's likely a high density of managed and feral colonies, and the messaging's changed over the recent weeks to start monitoring monthly for Varroa if there's Varroa in your area on the heat map, or if you have Varroa detected in your hives, just so you don't get in this situation where you can have this rapid decline. Next slide, please. Third case, this one is from the south coast of New South Wales. The videos were called when a beekeeper detected 15 mites per 300 bees in an alcohol wash. Treatment was applied. And the videos, just for the purposes of trying to assess what was going on with the hive, applied sticky mats every week. And in the first 3 weeks, each week the mat was removed and a new mat was put in, and rough numbers on the mats were about 7,000, then 3,500, then 2,500 mites. So quite a heavy infestation. The VDOs were advised that there was a hive kept nearby, and on inspection, that hive was found to be dead with signs of parasitic mite syndrome. So once again, likely cause was loss of the loss was large infestation with varroa. Interesting thing about this case is that initial call and the initial report was the first case reported in that region, so that there was nothing on the heat map that suggested mites were in that region. So even in areas where mites have not been reported, there's potential for colony loss if you're not monitoring regularly. So while it's important to check the heat map, don't become complacent. Next slide, please. This fourth case, I've showed this one really because we just want to show some of the pictures of things that we're seeing in the field. So this beekeeper had not monitored for varroa, and it's in a varroa dense area. The VDOs were called when the beekeeper noticed it was bees crawling around on the ground out the front of the hive. And on inspection, there was substantial impact on colony health. Hives were treated with Baverol, but probably not very confident that the hives are going to survive. But we've done that just to basically see whether or not they do survive or not at that level of infestation. If the beekeeper had monitored at an earlier stage, they would have identified the need for treatment and reduced their risk of colony failure. Next slide, please, Joe. So there's a series of pictures here that just show some of the things we see, and it's from this fourth case. You can see there that the VDOs have found a lot of ejected and dead pupae and adult worker bees crawling around on the ground. Next picture. Yeah, we've got open and perforated cappings. You can see open cappings in the middle and perforation up there near that pupae. And then we're seeing signs of, scale and brown sunken larvae, which look a lot like AFB. Next slide, please. Just click it again, Joe, please. Yeah, and you can see here that you've got sunken, twisted larvae. It looks a lot like AFB and a real spotty brood pattern. Now, interestingly, in this case, we took slides for AFB and EFB and sent them off the lab, and they come back negative for both. So this is classic parasitic mite syndrome. Next slide, please, Joe. You can see here, and if I had the mouse, I'd show Joe, but that second row of cells from the bottom, you can see the white, in that area there. That's varroa feces accumulated on the inside of the cells. Next slide, please. Oh, no, yep, that's it. Varroa on brood and in the cells. So you can see it on the brood in that top one, and then in the bottom of the cell in that bottom cell there. Next one, please. And this poor bee, this is a really extreme example, but I mean, I don't know how many varroa are on that poor adult bee, but it's quite a sad sight. There's 5 or 6. Next slide, please, Joe. I really only want to talk to this very, very quickly. I'll just explain that the blue line is theoretical growth of mite population in a hive if you had one mite enter your hive. The green horizontal line is the minimum level of detection, which represents 1 mite per 300 bees. And then the yellow and green horizontal, yellow and red horizontal lines are the treatment thresholds for autumn, winter, spring, and then the red one is summer, respectively. The things that I wanted to point out here is that if you have 1 mite enter your hive, there's quite a time before you get to detection threshold. But once you're at the detection threshold, where the blue line crosses the green line, there's not a long period of time before you're at treatment threshold. We're not talking months and months. We're talking, a period of weeks, to months perhaps. Again, this is all theoretical. But the next point to realise is if you don't catch that through monitoring and treat at those treatment thresholds, the varroa population very, very quickly increases and you end up with negative impacts on your hive. And the next point about this slide is that with reinfestation, you can very, very quickly be anywhere up that blue curve in a very, very short time frame that's much shorter than if you just had natural mite growth. So yeah, just click that, please, Joe. So the takeaway from that is that once varroa is in your area, it's important to monitor monthly because you haven't got all this natural build-up time. You're very, very quickly somewhere up that blue curve. Next one, please, Joe. So what can you do in New South Wales and the ACT? At the moment, the best thing to do is monitor frequently. And the most accurate methods are alcohol wash, soapy water wash, and sugar shake. We'd recommend monthly monitoring in areas where mite is present and consider monitoring it more frequently than 16 weeks in areas even where mite hasn't been detected yet, so you don't get caught out like one of those earlier cases that we talked about. Learn and be prepared. Attend a workshop. If you can get to one of those 8 workshops, get there. Contact the VDOs. They're a very good resource to assist you through this journey. Treat at thresholds. Consider liaising with beekeepers in your local area to coordinate your treatments. If you don't coordinate treatments, you end up in a situation where you treat, but your neighbour down the road doesn't treat, and they have a high build-up of mites, and then they essentially become a mite bomb for your hives post-treatment, and then they treat, and yours build up, and you return the favour. So it's really, really important to try and coordinate treatments. Coming into spring, minimise swarming, and don't disregard the value of drone uncapping. It's important to note that that's only a presence-absence method of monitoring. But I mean, speaking from personal experience, I now carry around an uncapping fork, and any drones cells that I find in the brood box, I uncap them and have a look. There's no mite being found in my area yet, but that's the means that I use to try and pick up that early presence-absence detection. And if you do find them in drones, then you need to go to the top of that slide and do one of the other 3 methods, just so that you can get an indication of your mite load and how that relates to treatment threshold. Next one, please, Joe. Just from experience in New South Wales, I think I just wanted to put a slide in to recommend what beekeepers in the other states can do. Just get ahead of the game. The beekeepers in New South Wales that are having the most success with varroa management are the ones that took the initiative, learned stuff early, attended workshops, spoke to other beekeepers, learnt from overseas experience, and had a plan in place. So attend the workshops, get in touch with VDOs when they're on the ground in your state. Have a management plan ready to go, so that when you start to find mites, you're not starting from scratch. Make sure you follow the monitoring and treatment threshold recommendations. And again, don't disregard the value of the drone uncapping as an initial presence absence tool. Next slide, please, Joe. Now, this is the New South Wales team. That's myself and 7 VDOs. The 8th VDO wasn't present when we took that photo, and I'm not very good at Photoshop, so I didn't want to try and put him in. But get in touch with the VDOs. In New South Wales, if you call the 1-800 number there, an email comes straight to me and I allocate a VDO to make contact with you. The VDOs are all passionate beekeepers, and they're passionate about helping the beekeeping industry get through this build-up phase and to have a successful future in honeybees managing varroa going forward. We're lucky in New South Wales, 4 of the 8 VDOs have overseas experience with varroa. And I can't emphasise enough that we don't work in the compliance space. We're there to help. Our job is to work with the industry and the recreational community to lift the standards across the state and make sure that you know, we transitioned into a successful future.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Dave. That was really, really good. Lots of people mentioning on the chat or the Q&A that the case studies are super, super helpful for people to get a bit of an idea of what's really happening at the moment. So congratulations on that really important bit of information that's coming out of industry. So this